Welcome to Truth Talk Live.
All right, let's talk.
The truth is, I can't hide it. I can't hold it no more.
A daily program powered by the Truth Network.
This is kind of a great thing, and I'll tell you why.
Where pop culture, current events, and theology all come together.
Speak
Your mind.
And now, here's today's Truth Talk Live host.
Should there be a Buckys on the Gaza Strip? There's the question today at Truth Talk Live. What do you think about that? How about Home Depot? What do you think? McDonald's? You know, you can look down the skyline of the new Gaza Strip via the Trump plan, you know, in order to bring peace to Israel. You know, what might the Gaza Strip look like? You know, you need a Taco Bell. You know, there's some things that just would fit in if it was American controlled. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? Do they need a Bucky's? 866-348-7884. 866-348-7884. Some things to, you know, just to put into your thought process of that is, wow, are we messing? Like, is that something America really wants to take control of any of the promised land? What might that do to our personal end times? Or, you know, there's a lot of folks have a lot of views on that, and I would love to know yours. And you know, I would, because this is a live call-in show, and it's the callers that always make the show. Definitely my favorite part always of the show is your calls. So, you know, what are your thoughts on this? 866-348, the number to call, 866-348-7884. And here to help us out today, we have, Greg Hinnant Ministries. Greg Hinnant himself is with us. He's the author of many, many books on end-time theology, certainly eschatology. And I like even better how you put it, Greg, that the real purpose of this stuff is to mature us into why, you know, God gave us these books to push into them, right?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it's most important because that's God's purpose, is to develop in us mature Christian character and prepare us not only for the rapture, but for eternity, to be with Him forever.
Yeah, and obviously you got a lot of people around you that may have questions. Oh, you're a Christian. What do you think about this? Or, you know, how does that engage you? You know, how is these things intrigued you? You may have a lot of questions, like, is there really a pre-tribulation rapture, or is there really is Israel been replaced by the church? There's all sorts of things out there you may have heard or believed or whatever. I can assure you those are the reason we have this show, is for you to call in, talk about that, give us your view against that, give us your view of whatever you got, because, you know, clearly one of the things that Jesus said very clearly is that my house would be a house of prayer. And I don't know if you ever given it much thought, but since your body is now the temple of the Holy Spirit, your house is to be a house of prayer. And we can be praying, right, about how does this exactly work? You know, God, should we be praying that our government make better decisions? Or should we, you know, how does that work? 866-348-7884 is the number to call in and share. 866-348-7884. And Greg, you have some, you feel like there's a great misunderstanding about replacement theology and what you call supersessionism. There you go. That's a nice word.
That's the theological jargon there. That's the term.
Supersessionalism.
Right. Supersessionism, which means, of course, supersede means to replace. And so the core of that teaching is that the church permanently replaces Israel, and therefore Israel has no part in the end time, and God will not fulfill the ancient Old Testament prophecies of the end time in the ethnic Jewish people in the Promised Land, but rather those are being fulfilled now spiritually in the church. So that's a view that I do not hold, but that's the view. That's the view.
But there are people that hold that view, and I've heard them expound on it, you know, very, directly in the show on a lot more than one occasion. And however, you know, that's obviously scripturally, I bet you may be like me. You're like, wait a minute, what do you do with Rome? What do you do with the book of Romans when it comes to that whole idea? And, Paul was certainly brokenhearted over his people, and there's all sorts of things along those lines. We got Jamal calling in Winston-Salem. We need your call, 866-348-7884. Jamal, you're on Truth Talk Live. What say you? Bucky's on the Gaza Strip.
Hey, Mr. Dillmore, and hello to you, Mr. Dr. Hinnant. Sorry about that. When I heard that the doctor was going to be on, I had to call. So, I'm actually in favor of the Bucky's being on there. And
they might as well get cheap gas if they're.
Yeah, might as well. Cheap gas and cheap fast food. And, I don't want to sound like, some kind of colonialist or something like that. But, there's been a lot of turmoil and a lot of fighting going on over there. So it's kind of like, okay, well, can we do something different? Maybe an American influence would change something. We don't have to, rule and, govern and, just have the American way put over there. But maybe a little bit of our influence could, go over there and change some things.
There you go. Well, Jamal, I clearly, that's something that our government's putting in place. And, I appreciate you calling in as always. And, you're right. He is clearly a teacher on this stuff at Christian Life Schools of Theology Global. Like he goes from all over the country teaching on this. So we're really honored to have him on the program. Jamal, I appreciate you calling in very much, buddy. God bless.
Thank you, guys. God bless.
All right. I appreciate it. So we got Sarah is in Jacksonville, Florida. Sarah, what say you? I'm so glad you called in today. How are you?
Hi. Thank you. I'm great. I was told several years ago, I heard where that land was promised to the tribes, the Israel, God takes care of that land sacredly. And I was concerned the last time when they gave Gaza Strip over to the Palestine. I'm not real good at this stuff, so I'm just.
We appreciate you calling. None of us, basically, honestly, are all that good at it, obviously.
They gave it away, and as soon as they gave it away, though, there was a catastrophe occurs.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, Sarah, I hate to interrupt you because I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your call. But we got a break. Will you please stay with me? Can you stay on?
Sure.
I would really appreciate it. I would also appreciate your call, 866-348-7884.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Welcome back to Truth Talk Live. How fun today. I would love your view on what about a Bucky's on the Gaza Strip? Like, how does that fit into your end times thinking, or maybe even to your peaceful thinking? Like Jamal commented in the first segment that, wow, we could bring some stability to that era. But Sarah called, and unfortunately we lost Sarah during a break. I was hoping we wouldn't. Sweet lady out of Jacksonville, Florida, who her concern, as is honestly my concern, is what you talking about, Willis. You don't want to mess with. This is my view, and you're welcome to argue with me. Believe me, you call us 866-348-7884. Is that it's pretty clear that property belongs to Israel. And they are to govern that property, and they are to be sovereign over that property. Now, I don't know what the deal is, and maybe we're not going to be sovereign over it. I don't know. But I know one thing. If it's up to Robby Dillmore, I'm going to pray that our wisdom, that we use great wisdom, because those who curse Israel, it isn't going to go well for them. And those who bless Israel, which I'm pretty sure what we're doing is an attempt to bless them. I don't have much doubt in my mind there. But what do you think? What do you think? Take me on, 866-348-7884, or even better, if you want to take on Dr. Hinnant. And so we haven't really gotten his position on this yet, so I'm going to jump right in here. Doc, should we be doing this?
Well, actually, from a biblical perspective, there's not really direct evidence on that, except what you just quoted from Genesis 12:3, where God promises to bless those who bless the seed of Abraham and curse those who curse them. And so we want to be sure we're on the side of supporting Israel and doing what we can, as we can, to help preserve what God has done really in the Zionist movement to bring them back from 1897 to 1948, and then what he's done from that time period to preserve them against all odds.
And I love what you just brought up, which, by the way, if this phone doesn't light up, come on, guys, 866-348-7884. I know what you're thinking. And for some of you in this market, we're going to lose the program after the bottom of the hour. A lot of you, we're on across the country, but here in Winston-Salem, that kind of thing, at the bottom of the hour, it's going to go to another program. So I got a few more minutes, 866-348-7884. So the Zionist movement that Dr. Hinnant just referred to is God clearly called his people back to Israel, prior to World War II. And I had a good friend. Well, I have a good friend. He's still a good friend of mine who grew up in Israel. And his family came over during the original Zionists in the 20s and the 30s. Mm-hmm. And, they had these kibbutzes back then that they were farming and they were doing all these things. Mm-hmm. And the way he described what happened was his family came from Czechoslovakia. His name is Nadav Shrir. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to get his grandparents to come, and they finally talked him into it in 1939 from Yugoslavia. Here comes his grandfather. And at this point in time, it was his father's father that was coming. And he gets off the train, and he can't find his brand of cigarettes in Israel, which flips him out, being, in his culture at the time, that he can't get his cigarettes. He gets on the train, goes back to Yugoslavia. They unload him off that train and put him on the train to where? The concentration camp.
Right, yes.
And so
they were using those after the war to sort of as a storage, a retaining area for Jews.
Right. So when you think about it, it's almost as if part of what was going on with the annihilations of the Jews in Europe were those the guys who did not follow the call to go back to Israel. And I don't want to say that other than that makes a pretty good case. And again, my friend was not a Christian. Yeah. He was just telling me the story, but I was very familiar with the call that God had for the Jews to come back to the Promised Land. Yes. And unfortunately for a lot of them that didn't, wow. Yes. So what you're talking about is very relevant to end times theology, and that's really your expertise and where you're going right now.
Yes, and I think all evangelical eschatological teachers would agree that the primary end time sign was the reestablishment of the state of Israel against all odds. Against the world did not know what to do with the Jews. They wanted to get rid of them. There was an idea after Theodor Herzl wrote the Judenstaat, the Jewish state, there was a plan to put them in South America, and then there was one to put them in Africa. And the zealous Jews said, no, we're not going to do that. And they held out. So finally the door was open for them to have a chance to go back to Palestine. But it was a fight all the way. The Arabs fought them all the way. And the West was patronizing to the Arabs because of oil. And but this, you see the hand of God in it all. And I think it's amazing to see the leaders that were raised up. Oh, my goodness, Golda Meir, who was born in Europe, lived in America for 15 years, so she had American culture in her resume, and she was used on the eve of the Battle of Independence to come to America and raise funds that helped bring about the state. And then the other leaders, Chaim Weizmann, who was their ambassador, David Ben-Gurion, who moved there in the early 1900s and lived there, and he worked on the kibbutz. And then I think Ben Yehuda, I think is the most amazing figure, who had a vision in Russia and was deathly ill, and then he repented of not following that vision. The vision was the land and the language. And so he came back and, against all odds, worked on developing the Hebrew, modern Hebrew, because only then Hebrew was used in the synagogue liturgically. So he was rejected even by the zealous Zionists. They rejected him. I think it was Herzl came and visited him, met him, and then he wrote in his diary the next day, I've met some nut who thinks that we all ought to speak Hebrew. But had that not been done, these Jews coming from all over Europe would not have had a common language. So it was an essential. But God's providential hand was in bringing these key leaders together from that period of 1897 to 1948 to bring about the state.
It's a beautiful thing. So what are we doing? 866-348-7884. How, what's your view on this? What are you praying for? I would really, really love your view. You got a few minutes to call in, but of course we're going to have the whole show in a lot of areas. We got Tony is in North Carolina. Tony, you're on Truth Talk Live. What you got for us?
Yeah, I had a question. So does America normally have some type of business or something in Gaza, or would this be the first time ever?
That's a great question, Doc. Are you familiar with it?
Again, I'm not an expert at current matters of state concerning Gaza. But, just from what I know of it, our part there would be to assist Israel, but we have not had any vested interest in Gaza that I'm aware of. Actually, funds have been funneled to Palestinian terrorist organizations through U.S. aid, which was just shut down recently, which is good. And so that's one way we had a connection there.
Oh, we clearly have interest in business interests all across the region on all sorts of levels, Tony. But and again, if you'll hang on with me through the break, we'll take up your question more. Can you do that, Tony?
Yeah.
I hope so. And I would love for your call, 866-348-7884. Should there be a Bucky's in the Gaza Strip? We got Tony. We got Doc. We need you. Call us.
Truth Talk Live.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Welcome back to Truth Talk Live. Today's question, should there be a Bucky's on the Gaza Strip? Moreover, should America have that interest in that whole area? Should we, take charge? What does that look like exactly? What are your thoughts? We would love to know. 866-348-7884, 866-34-TRUTH. We lost Tony, unfortunately, during the break, but his question was, does America currently have interests? They certainly have business interests, but what we're talking about is actually having some interest in order to try to keep the peace. We got Nick is in Jacksonville, Florida. Nick, you're on Truth Talk Live.
Hey, how you doing?
I am wonderful.
Awesome. I think that Bucky's would be great. Obviously, that people would probably go broke going over there because every time I go to Bucky's, I'm dropping $100 every time anyway. But
I think falafel brisket is in the works. I'm just
for real. But my question is this: so yes, I think America should be involved. But my question is this: as far as like helping Israel out. Is Israel in the Bible the same Israel as today? And that's my question: is if we're here to help Israel and be for Israel, is it the same Israel as in the Bible?
That is one great question. Unfortunately, in my opinion, Nick, we have one of the actual nation's leading experts on that particular subject right here in front of me. And so how would you answer that question, Doc?
Well, the ethnic Jews, yes, would have derived from the ancient Hebrew nation. And as you know, the Hebrews first, under Saul, then David, created a monarchy. And then after Solomon's reign, it was divided into two kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Israel was defeated by the Assyrians, and those peoples were never specifically regathered to the land, but God retains the knowledge of those tribes. They're not lost. And the southern kingdom then was defeated by the Babylonians and then was brought back after the post-exile. The temple was rebuilt, and that led up to the intertestamental period where we come up to the arrival of Christ at the first advent. So the ethnic Jews that descended from that original monarchy, the tribes of of Israel, descendants, the physical descendants of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob. They are the ethnic Jews today. Now, the state of Israel is a modern entity, and it is comprised of both religious Jews and non-religious Jews. And so it today is a pluralistic society. There's approximately 14% Orthodox Jews there. They are not believers in Yeshua and in Jesus, but they will turn to the Lord after the church is taken out in mass. That's predicted by Paul, is prophesied by Paul in Romans chapter 11.
And I would also add, Nick, that, and again, just because I get a chance to interview so many Jews, I'll be at the NRB next week, National Religious Broadcasters Convention, and there'll be quite a contingent of Jewish people. And they have, because, again, genealogy, you could tell through the Bible, was extremely important to them. They still hold their genealogies. And they're very proud of whether or not they came from the tribe of Dan or they came from, and again, nowadays with the DNA test, well, they can prove it. That's the real deal. And beautifully, in my opinion, one of the gigantic things that they hold to this day is most of them can read biblical Hebrew. It's the most ancient language in the world, where there's people that actually are alive today that can read, books that are 3,000 years old. Like, how cool is that? Like, man.
That is cool.
And God was able to preserve both the language and his people. I think, and we were talking about it during the break, Nick, that a lot of the Jews believe that God is trying to prove to the Arabs that he's God, and that they actually love the Arabs, and they want to see them come to a knowledge of the true God. They have not seen where Jesus fits into the picture. However, Jesus will. But I love your question, Nick. And did you have a follow-up, something you wanted to say?
Not really. I was just going to say I do hope that we as America do help Israel in that area. I hope that we're just standing for and strong for Israel. This administration hopefully will do that. And I'm for Israel, and I hope that we can get some peace out of it all.
Amen. Thank you. Nick,
Yes,
great. Dr. Hinnant has a word for you, too.
Yes, too. And also there is an ethnic connection between the Arab people and the Jews, because the Arabs are considered to be the descendants of Ishmael, also a son of Abraham. And so there is a DNA connection there, and that's a natural love that they would have for the Arab people. And, of course, we know that the Arabs are either Sunni or Shia, most of them Muslims. And so it's very important, because when Muhammad came along, he presented himself as a prophet to the Jews, and they listened to him and they rejected him. And then he presented himself as a prophet to the Christians, and they did the same. So that's...
And something else, Nick, that's cool, I just realized recently, is I was in Spain 2 weeks ago. And... Mm-hmm. The Muslims occupied Spain more years than the Christians did, for like 600 years.
Yeah.
And you would think that the Spanish people were upset about that, but that's actually the opposite of the case. The Spanish people almost revere the Arabs at what they did for their country, what they built for their country. In other words, they don't have a hatred for Muslims at all. I was shocked at how in what high regard that they considered the Muslims, which in its own way, you think, clearly they're God's people just like we're God's people. And if they're lost, well, so was I once.
Me too. Yeah. Me too. Yes, absolutely.
And so, man, I hope God shows up, and it's going to be cool. But I love your heart, Nick. Thank you so much for calling in.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys.
God bless. Bye-bye. Bye. All right, we got Mike is in Dayton, Ohio. Mike, you're on Truth Talk Live.
Well, thank you for taking my call. I just was curious, is the Gaza, I don't know very well. I'm not that great at any of this. Is the Gaza Strip part of the Israel territory that God promised land? Is that?
Yeah, not only that, Mike, it's really cool. You know what it actually is? It actually is like, man, that's the hotbed and has been forever, because it's where the Philistines hung out. We're talking about Gath. We're talking about like Goliath hang out.
Dagon.
Right, like, man, this a whole lot of shenanigans have taken place in Gaza for a long time,
this
and
is the bullseye area.
Right, and you can't help but wonder, right? Like, Satan holds this with a fierce hand, and has, and it's just been a battle, and so clearly God, there's something quite valuable. So what, you got something?
Yeah, because this is really Satan's attempt to preempt God's restoration of the Jewish people spiritually. Their restoration to the state of Israel is the natural preparation for their upcoming spiritual conversion to faith in Jesus, who they call, the Messianics call Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. So Satan, he can read the Bible, and he listens to eschatological teachers. He's not omniscient, but he can listen, and so he does know what's afoot, and he knows that the success of Zionism and the Jewish state is for a purpose. And so he's doggedly resisting there, because he does not want them not only to be established in the land to be a prosperous nation, but really he doesn't want them to be ready to be converted en masse to faith in Jesus after the rapture and departure of the church. I just was talking to you about the powerful impact that's going to have primarily on the Jewish people.
Yeah, when you think about it, Mike, spiritually, there's a lot of stuff. Words have tremendous power. And so for years, I mean, like since the times of King David, right, there are things being played out that were based on vows that were made, that were based on things that were said that gave certain demons certain power over certain area. And so it is a spiritual battle. Our battle's not against flesh and blood, but spiritual forces in high places. And this is all the more reason why our prayers, like,
absolutely,
we're leaving an inheritance of prayers. Your life, as you pray for this stuff, right, that you're praying for something really, really cool, right? Because what we're talking about is Jesus is coming back, right?
Yes.
Right. And that was my next point, or my next thought was, Jesus asked, how do we pray, for, our I'm sorry, just a little nervous.
It's hard to be on the radio, Mike. I get
it. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. He told us how to pray. Our will become, His will.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
Yes. Yes, His will, and His will is His will to conquer. Is to give Israel back that land, and that's what we need to pray. All
right, Mike. Well, we're going to go to a break, but you stay with us, because we got more. But we need your call. You're sitting there. We know you got something to say. 866-348-7884. 866-34-TRUTH. We'll be right back.
Truth Talk Live.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Welcome back to Truth Talk Live. How fun today. Should the Gaza Strip have a Buckys? And if you're not familiar with Buckys, and I know that actually our producer, Nick himself, has never actually visited a Bucky's. He's never tasted of the brisket. He's never tasted of the cinnamon roasted pecans as you walk into and you get this big, huge... All right. I mean, you have to be to this place. Nick, you've been deprived, but the good news is they're making one. I think it's in Burlington or something. It won't be long, buddy.
That's not far.
You're going to be, and probably the pork chop sandwiches won't go so good in the Gaza Strip. Just saying it. Well, on the one side. But anyway. I'm sorry, I just couldn't help. It's so good. Anyway, we got Mike is in Dayton, and we got Dr. Hinnant with us. And Dr. Hinnant has just come out. I mean, he has so many phenomenal resources. In fact, I'm going to let you describe some of the things so people are listening. You go, man, I'd like to know more about this end time stuff, and boy, you've got resources for that.
Yeah, thank you, Robby. Yeah, about 10 years ago, the Lord led me to turn in a new direction and give intensive, extensive study to biblical prophecy, Old Testament and New, and it produced 4 end time books, and so far 2 courses. And the books are Revelation Notes, an inspirational commentary on the book of Revelation that gives you exposition on every verse in the book of Revelation, and a pastoral application, and many sermonettes are attached to that too. It's a large volume, over 600 pages. It's available, all of my books are available in both print and ebook through Amazon and other outlets. And then there was a book called The Tribulation Story. And the Tribulation Story takes chapters 6 through 19 in the book of Revelation and puts them in understandable chronological order, and also explains the narrative of the back and forth between God's forces and Satan's during that time, explains the purpose of that time. As you know, Revelation 6 through 19 are not in chronological order in the book of Revelation. It's just thrown in what I call a prophetic jumble, like a jigsaw puzzle. So this book helps put it together for you in a very easy-to-understand way, but it is not fictional. It's a fully factual book, and it's expositional. And then there is the Second Coming of Christ. The Second Coming of Christ is a 3-part book. It's over 400 pages. It's called The Second Coming of Christ, His Appearing, His Return, and Our Preparation. And it talks about all the prophecy, Old Testament and New, bearing on the Lord's appearing and His return. Then the middle part of the book has 6 chapters on spiritual preparation, which I consider to be of paramount importance. And I use the words Jesus used in His Olivet Discourse: be watching, be ready, live wisely, live worthily, and Luke interprets that as prayerful life, and come to know Him intimately. All right, those I used and exposited in those chapters. And then the last part is polemical. That is, it's debating Christian doctrine, and I make the case for the pre-trib rapture. I make the case for the partial rapture, in that not all people who call themselves Christians will be taken when Jesus appears. That's very clear. And then the last part is a concise comparison of every major end-time view. It's very enlightening what's in that section. And then the final book is the one we're really talking about today, is the Day of the Lord Commentary. And that is interpreting Old Testament end times prophecy. It looks at every end time prophecy from Genesis through Malachi, and foreshadowings, types and shadows that address the end times. It's a rather large book. It's over 400 pages.
Now at 557.
Yeah, thank you. 500. Yeah.
And I would just throw in here that, like, oh my goodness. So if you're thinking this is a little overwhelming, it's pretty simple. If you go to Amazon and you just type in Greg Hinnant, Hinnant, guess what? You're going to get all these books, and you're going to see, oh my goodness, well, here's the one, and it'll give a sample of each one. Again, just go to Amazon and type in Greg Hinnant, and again, when you get those books, like, oh man, go back in and tell them what you think of it, good or bad, because it means so much to an author to get some feedback.
Yep.
And then again, he's got these courses through the whole Christian Life School of Theology Global. So that's Christian Life School of Theology Global. That's a internet-based thing where you can go find out, take these courses. Like, oh my goodness, how fun is that? So we still have Mike on the line, I hope, and I put him on hold for this because Mike, are you still with me?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, good. So it's time to hit Dr. Hinnant between the eyes. Okay, so you just heard him say that he's a pre-tribber, right?
A pre-tribber, yeah.
He's a pre-tribber. That means that he believes that the rapture is going to happen before the tribulation. And so, so that since nobody called in other than you to hit him with the hard questions, and I'm not going down on what I actually believe. I'm just going to throw these at him because I'm familiar with the ones most common he probably deals with, that you can get an understanding from him how he would answer these questions. So what do you say to the person that says, gee, the rapture doctrine was not taught in in earlier Bible times, like Martin Luther knew nothing about it and all those kind of things. What do you say to them?
Well, the first answer is that eschatology was the last of the theologies to be systematized. So in other words, it's the last thing that the church dealt with, trying to figure out the divinity of Christ in the first few centuries, and then other issues, then Marian doctrines, and as the Reformation occurs, grace and law, and where do these things fit in, and justification by grace, salvation by grace through faith alone, in Christ alone, His cross alone, His blood alone. So it took several centuries to figure that out. And so really, the church didn't come to the eschatological table till about the 1700s there, and you had Daniel Whitby came up with the post-millennial view, which prevailed for about 200 years because they thought then the world was getting better. And then at the late 1800s, that view changed because it was clear the world was not getting better. And so...
Would you agree with that, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, we agree.
And so then the pre-trib rapture view was sort of codified by J.N. Darby, who was of the Plymouth Brethren, in about 1830. It was caught onto and embraced by Dwight L. Moody and C.I. Scofield. It was incorporated into the C.I. Scofield Reference Bible, and it is still to this day the primary view of evangelicals around the world. There are obviously many other views, but there are biblical reasons that really make it clear that the tribulation period is designed by God as Israel's final week of predestined history. Daniel 9, verses 24 through 27 talks about that. So that is Israel's period. Jacob calls it in Jeremiah 30. Jeremiah calls it in Jeremiah 30, verses 6 and 7, the time of Jacob's trouble. Right? Daniel 12:1 identifies it as the time of trouble that has never been before, nor ever shall be, in Daniel 12:1. And then he also speaks of the resurrection immediately following. And then Jesus picks up on this in the Olivet Discourse and refers to Daniel's statement about this time coming that is a time of trouble that has never been before and never will be afterwards. That's the tribulation period.
So the question, to get back, clearly the tribulation is very, very, very scriptural. The question, and for a lot of people that are questioning that kind of thing is,
why first?
Yeah, what scripture, what do you use to go, okay, there's clearly going to be a rapture? I've heard very few people say that wasn't going to happen unless they were amillennialists or something.
Right.
And those people have that view, which is interesting.
Yes.
But what would you use scripturally to say, oh, well, here's where this is what gave me faith for this?
Yes, well, there's actually a combination of scriptures, but in 1 Thessalonians 5, which is in the same context of 1 Thessalonians 4, it's all one context in the original letter.
Right.
No chapter division, not even verse divisions, no divisions at
all. Right.
He
was writing a letter.
So anyway, but it's all, we would not be able to read it. Let's put it that way. But Paul said that God has not ordained us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, wrath in that context means the period of wrath, specifically according to Revelation 6, the wrath of the Lamb. So the whole 7 years is a period.
So wait a minute. I'm going to write this. I'm taking notes.
Yeah.
I'm taking notes.
Robbie's reaching for paper here.
I'm trying to find a piece of paper
Can't
here.
find any paper in the radio station.
What specific verse is that word wrath so I can go study it?
Yes, and that's in 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 9 and 10 there.
Okay.
Where he says, God has not ordained or appointed us to wrath, but that we should obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. Salvation in that context refers to deliverance from the tribulation by way of the rapture.
I'm with you. And so the operating question there is that wrath?
Yes, and that's the question that's debated because the other views that take the mid-tribulation rapture, the pre-wrath view, which is about 3/4 the way through, and the post-trib rapture, all teach that the first part of the tribulation is not wrath. Now, I got some real proof for you here today. If you track Revelation 6, 1 through 8, the first 4 seals, first of all, you see the Lamb is the one who's releasing them, not the Antichrist. So this is the action of the Lamb. It's a divine seal that's opened, all 4. First brings the Antichrist, the second brings the period of war, it'll be World War III, third brings famine, and fourth brings pandemic disease. And so those lead to the death of 1/4 of the human race. Today, that's 2 billion people. This is unthinkable in its magnitude. For that not to be the wrath of God is absolutely illogical, unreasonable, and unprovable. Now, but to give you a specific text.
These were the questions you had, Mike. But you hear that music, and Doc,
and we'll
you can see you need to get these books. You need to go to Greg Hinnant on Amazon and look at these, because you clearly he's got some wonderful stuff. Or again, go to the Christian Life School of Theology Global. Take one of his courses. How fun will that be as you get this stuff so that we can all be prepared? Thanks for listening.